From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. A glimpse into the future.
For us, 5G really unlocks the opportunity for faster machine-to-machine communication.
How the future of food and the future of agriculture is being reimagined. What if a planter could hug the hills when planting in any field?
And really, that was just really the heartbeat that started this all out.
How one company started with a blank canvas to reimagine how producers plant. The administration's advice for farmers frustrated over China: it takes time.
So we're talking about at a minimum 120 days, 4 months, before we have the first shipment land in China. That is, I would argue, is probably a best case scenario.
And in John's world,
EVs and GMOs. There's a curious link.
now for the news. President Trump taking a victory lap after signing Phase 1 deal with China and the approval of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement in the Senate. The president speaking at the American Farm Bureau Convention in Austin, Texas. President Trump speaking for a third year in a row at that convention, touting the recent trade agreements, telling those gathered, quote, "We did it."
The deal with China will tear down market barriers and pry open vast new markets for American beef, pork, poultry, seafood, soybeans, rice, dairy, infant formula, animal feed, biotechnology, and much, much more. This is an incredible success for our entire country, and it was your fortitude, your perseverance, and your devotion that made it all possible.
The president also touching on topics such as biofuels and the environment, specifically the Waters of the U.S. rule, saying, quote, "When it comes to the environment, I will trust a farmer over a Washington bureaucrat or a left-wing extremist," end quote. Now, many farmers telling us they liked what they heard, saying the president did what he said he would do.
You have multiple markets that are opening up and expanding, and shipping product back to China hopefully will be a good thing, get more product moving out and lower our stocks, and working freely with our close countries such as Mexico and Canada is always good because you have reduced transportation costs. So let's work closely with those closest to us.
He's helping with some regulations, some unreasonable ones like WOTUS. We need to know, what's regulated on our farm and what's not, or what's a water of the U.S., and he's helping with that.
Meanwhile, the markets continue to wait on China to make all of those big buys of U.S. ag goods that was agreed upon in that Phase 1 trade agreement. And the administration's advice for farmers implementing the deal: it takes time. The president's chief trade negotiator for agriculture, Ambassador Greg Dowd, says give it a little time. He says the result of those 33 negotiating sessions and hundreds of hours in talks created very specific time frames for implementation. The agreement takes 30 days to be official, and then within the document are targeted dates for implementations of each stated goal, some 5, some 10, some 20 days.
30 days entry into a force, 30 days to get the changes made, and another 60 days to actually potentially get beef into China. So we're talking about at a minimum 120 days, 4 months, before we have the first shipment land in China. That is, I would argue, is probably a best case scenario.
With Phase 1 now in place, the Trump administration is working on another agreement with another trading partner, the European Union. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, President Trump said he would impose new tariffs on European car imports if the EU does not agree to a new trade agreement. Earlier this week, France reached a truce with the U.S. over a proposal to tax American internet companies, but other European countries have not, and that could lead to more trade battles.
The United States has been losing $150 billion and more for many years. $150 billion more. I mean, really more than that. With the European Union, they have trade barriers where you can't trade. They have tariffs all over the place. They make it impossible. They are, frankly, more difficult to do business with than China. We have a great relationship with China now. We had some testy moments, very testy, beyond testy. Worse than a lot of people would understand. But we got it done, and I think Phase 2 will go nicely also. But with the European Union, and frankly, I'll be honest, I wanted to wait till I finished China before I went to work on, respectfully, Europe.
But the president of the EU Commission said she had very good talks with President Trump while in Davos. And it's not just the EU. Officials tell us multiple other trade negotiations are still in the works, including the possibility of deals with the UK, Africa, and India. Farm Journal's Jim Wiesmeyer is reporting President Trump is planning a visit to India soon. Wiesmeyer telling AgriTalk's Chip Flory a deal may already be in the works with India.
They will announce a mini trade agreement that will include access to U.S. produce and dairy products in particular. India wants the U.S. to roll back higher tariffs on steel and aluminum products.
Indian officials have said the visit could take place next month or in March. The EPA announcing changes to the waters of the U.S. rule this week. Officials saying they have a new WOTUS rule now called the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. They say it will provide certainty and predictability for American farmers, landowners, as well as businesses. Now, the old rule was repealed last fall. This change is a 2015 rule that expanded the 1972 Clean Water Act to certain wetlands, streams, and other bodies of water. Farmers complained it was vaguely written and infringed on property rights. Some environmental advocates say the new changes make it harder to maintain a clean water supply for the American public. That's it for the news. Well, more winter weather this weekend, but will it be as severe as what some of you saw last weekend? Mike Hoffman has your forecast next. Mike Hoffman joins us now with our forecast. Mike, I think we need to change this picture to snow because another round of winter weather making its way across the country this week and this weekend. It seems like this pattern, though, is just on repeat.
Thanks, Tyne. It really has. My concern is this, that we go into a colder weather pattern and still stormy weather pattern for the second half of winter, and that continues into early spring. I hope not. We don't want a repeat of last year. We're already starting off wet, as you can see. But most of the middle of the country, most of the Corn Belt, definitely on the wet side already. We don't need any more real storms as we head towards spring. You can see some dry areas, central mountains into the Pacific Northwest. Other than that, a lot of the country is wetter than normal for this time of the year. Now, the long-term drought, we still have some areas in Texas, especially South Texas, that are severe or extreme drought, but there are kind of pockets here and there. Most of it's gone in the southeast and mid-Atlantic. We have some Four Corner region areas as well, and a little bit of dryness still in the Pacific Northwest, but nothing major at this point. Here's the jet stream. This is a shot of Arctic air into the eastern half of the country. Now, obviously, it's not going to be pure Arctic air all the way to Florida, but you're going to turn pretty chilly this week for the first time this winter. And you can see that trough kind of digs in, and there's very cold air over Canada. So any little excuse for it to come south, it comes south easily. So my point with saying that is, even though it looks like it might be warming up dramatically here in the middle of the country, not so sure. This cold air that has been building and building over Canada is pressing southward, and it's hard to dislodge it. And then we see another trough, another storm system as we head through the end of the week into the middle of the country with a shot of colder air coming in behind that once again as we head through next weekend. So still a pretty active weather pattern. Nothing major to start this week, but we just got done with a big storm system, and what is lingering behind it is some lake effect snow. Some of that's on the heavy side as we start the week. Still a lingering shower in South Florida, and the next system coming into the Pacific Northwest with some showers out that way. Taking a look at Wednesday, you can see the frigid air kind of leaving, trying to anyway. Still pretty cold for the mid-Atlantic through the Great Lakes into the southern prairies of Canada, and chilly into Florida for this time of the year. Lots of sunshine in the east, though. Gathering storm systems out west, as you can see, with some rain and mountain snows. And we go to Friday. There's that storm system, another wet system with lots of rain in the southern Mississippi, central Mississippi Valley. Where that rain snow line is, hard to tell right now, but there's still cold air up there, and that's trying to press. So that's something we'll have to watch. A little bit of rain and snow in the Pacific Northwest as well. Here's the 30-day outlook for temperatures. I'm going below normal for the central and northern Mississippi Valley, the Great Lakes, the Northeast, and the Northwest. Above normal along the Gulf Coast and much of Texas. 30-day outlook for precipitation above normal where that cold air is battling with the warmth, and that's the mid-Atlantic back into Texas. Below normal for the northern plains and many places out west. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, trade, and more trade was what was in our news this weekend, but the markets really still seem unfazed by it all. We'll get some insight into the markets next as we head on the road to Illinois with Chip Nellinger and Sam Hudson. Welcome back. Here now from Precision Planting's Winter Conference in Tremont, Illinois. A good crowd this week. But with Chip Nellinger of Blue Reef Agri Marketing, as well as Sam Hudson of Corn Belt Marketing, when you look at the markets, and we've had a few days after the signing of the U.S.-China trade agreement, a few down days in the markets, especially with soybeans. Why is there still so much disappointment, Sam?
I think we want to see the nuts and bolts of the agreement. You got to see the demand. We've kind of baked in the signing itself, I believe, in the bean market. We had funds that were short a pretty sizable amount on the board. They covered those positions, and now they've got more of a net even position out there. Last Friday's action in corn, they were short quite a bit of corn. So just these rumors of China purchasing seems to create a little bit of a tailwind, but now we've got to see the proof of it and hopefully see the cash markets lead the way.
Well, since we've seen soybeans come down a little bit, do you think soybean-wise, how much more would we need to come down to be priced competitively that China would want to buy?
Well, the problem is, and part of the reason for the negativity after that signing is that we've kind of missed our window, because China, one of the things China said, which wasn't fresh news, it was there all along, and the market kind of took it wrong, was that they were going to buy as the market dictates. Well, right now, the market would dictate going into February, March, April that they're going to buy South American supplies. And so that's part of the negativity around beans as well. So that doesn't mean, I think the surprise would be that they just come in and keep buying ours throughout the rest of the winter on top of South America. I think that would be the shock that the market doesn't expect. But that's some of the negativity in beans. And like Sam said, we rallied 70 cents straight up ahead of the report in beans, so some of that was baked in.
Yeah, so that market conditions that China talked about, U.S. Trade Representative's office this week seemed to clarify that a bit, basically saying, well, when China typically buys from us, they'll buy from us, but when China typically buys from South America or other places, they'll do so. So typically right now, as we set in the beginning of the year, what would China be buying from us?
Well, and you mentioned the economics of it. We can start off there with the corn. I mentioned last Friday the rumors of that, but from an economic standpoint, the gap between U.S. corn and that of South American corn seemed to be the most narrow in terms of it being advantageous for them to get it from the U.S. anyways. So we have two things: is the metrics of it being advantageous for them to do it, and then just strictly the timing and when they need it. We've seen in the past them buy from the U.S. and Brazil and from South American countries regardless. So I think it's going to be how adamant are they on the front end of this to really show proof of this deal, and secondly, how are we going to enforce it if they don't?
Well, I think one thing we've learned is volatility isn't going anywhere, right? I mean, in 2020, even though we have this deal signed, we're still going to see volatility. And Secretary Perdue stating to farmers that it may not be until the end of the year that we see China fulfill that $40 billion agreement. If that's the case, I mean, could that market uncertainty linger over the markets again this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's in my mind, last Friday kind of shifted the psychology a little bit of the market. And it was prior to that, we're never going to get a trade agreement. A tweet would come out when we got close, and the market was easy to sell off in that mode. And now the question is, if you're bearish, you could just wake up and the snap of a finger, China bought a large amount of something, corn, beans, ethanol, wheat, whatever that might be. And so do you want to hold a big short position if you're a fund or a large spec in that environment? So I think it's shifted a little bit, but yes, now not the uncertainty of are we going to get a tweet that the trade deal's off, but are we going to get a tweet or a flash sale from the USDA that China started their buying spree? I think they're going to have to kind of spread that out sooner rather than later. It's going to be hard to shove $40 billion of ag products in the last 2 or 3 months of the year. So they're going to have to kind of spread that out a little bit. And I would think that in the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to start seeing a little bit of indication of what they're going to buy.
Yeah, and we mentioned it last week on the show, coming up on that Chinese New Year. We know typically that's a quiet time from China. So while we have some skepticism and some doubt surfacing, this is typically a time where China goes a little quiet, right?
Yeah, and I think that was part of the optimism on Friday is, hey, here we go, we're going to get some news, maybe even more potential news ahead of when they kind of go silent. If we've got to wait until after they come back from holiday, you're going to be on the doorstep of another, USDA crop report wondering what they're going to do with demand with what we've seen thus far, and still no headlines. So I think the weekly, the daily sales data is going to be very important here moving forward.
All right, we need to take a quick break, but a lot more to talk about this weekend on U.S. Farm Report. We'll do that with Sam and Chip later this weekend. Well, more and more electric vehicles are hitting the road, a trend John Phipps says we can't ignore. He joins us now from his farm.
To say farmers have been skeptical of electric vehicles, EVs, would be a notable understatement. As manufacturers roll out concept models of battery-powered trucks and even tractors, we can hardly keep from guffawing. It is currently preposterous that the trusty old internal combustion engine would yield its dominance on our equipment. Our vehicles too, but I think we're starting to suspect that may be more possible than we thought. News items like the announcement that Tesla, the world's leading EV maker, was now worth more than Ford or GM combined, forces us to hedge our bets or conclude that investors have collectively lost their minds. Given our reverence for wealth and people who have billions, most of us are instead rethinking how possible an EV might be in our garage. Still, no matter how broad-minded we are, it is hard for many of us to figure out what car makers are thinking, even as headline after headline confirms that the auto industry will spend this decade shifting to an EV majority production. It baffles us, largely because we cannot find any evidence of consumers clamoring for those vehicles. But what we are oddly overlooking is this may not be a demand-driven phenomenon. It may be a deliberate supplier decision. Our weak commitment to environmental action, despite our love of environmental boasting, makes auto execs' plans a little bit hard to believe. Maybe we're just not looking at the right reasons. EVs have far fewer parts, which leads to the need for much less labor, somewhere around 30 to 50% less. This fact is not lost on auto workers and can be seen in the recent strike settlement. This simplicity of construction ripples through the whole industry. Less maintenance, fewer repairs, fewer and shorter supply chains, which are seriously threatened by the trade turmoil. In short, for car makers, EVs offer a wide range of financial benefits. I think that's a big reason they are making the change. Foisting a product change on unenthusiastic buyers can be risky, but when the whole industry moves in one direction, consumer reluctance can be just overwhelmed, which is what I expect to happen. And if you don't think manufacturers can pull off this kind of consumer steamrolling, remember who led the sea change to GMO crops. It wasn't grocery shoppers, it was farmers.
Thanks, John. Well, when we come back, Machinery Pete takes us out to Washington State, where a father-son team are all about tractors. Tractor Tales is next.
Tractor Tales is brought to you by eTractor.com, Sullivan Auctioneer's new online equipment platform, eTractor.com.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we've got a story for you of a father and son showing off their classic Ford.
I have a 1942, as best we can tell, Ford 9N or possibly a 2N tractor. Well, I'm not exactly sure. There isn't any casting numbers. There was a casting number on the head that did indicate 1942, but the block has been changed. And one of the lead descriptors on it was the hubs, which I found were more towards the 2N side. My uncle actually picked this up for me as a project from a family friend who has a farm close by. It wasn't terrible. It had good bones, but definitely need to this level of restoration and needed quite a bit of work. Oh, it was dismantled almost down to the last bolt. Sent everything out, sandblasted, prepped it, painted it, reassembled it. But first we made sure it was running before we did that.
I helped him with like little bits and pieces of the restoration process on it. I helped him with like hanging the parts outside for prepping it for like painting and whatnot.
Primarily it's a parade princess. So my son calls it the 1,000-pound paperweight.
Well, I like that I get the opportunity to like pull it around in parades and get to pull around the cheerleaders with it. I mean, it's kind of another type of atmosphere, like getting to drive them around just because they're so like rowdy and cheering on it.
There was a company in just outside of Spokane called Draper tractor parts, which has now gone out of business here last year, unfortunately. But they were a great resource for getting the parts for it. Just little stuff, stuff you really wouldn't pay a lot of attention to, clamps and brackets, to try to keep it as original as you could.
Well, a decade of change. Next in our Farm Journal report, we'll take a peek at how technology continues to change the future of farming. And speaking of the future, one equipment company thinks they created the perfect planter. We'll give you your first glimpse later this weekend on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Welcome back. Well, as we start a new decade, no doubt America's farmers are in store for big changes over the next 10 years. From advancements in technology to genetics to lab-grown food, the future is here, ready or not. Farm Journal editor Clinton Griffiths has a look at what's next in today's Farm Journal report.
Farm shows aren't the only place to see the latest ag technology. This year, several ag businesses made their way to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
The sprayer really allows us to continue to engage the tech community with all of the technology that's on it, self-guidance technology, the precision that is in some of our nozzles. But again, it also allows us to engage the broader discussion around sustainability and how farmers want to do more with less.
And that starts with some of the new capabilities developed by Blue River Technologies, a wholly owned subsidiary of John Deere. This full-size spray rig is seeing the field in a whole new way.
We have computer vision and machine learning technology, artificial intelligence that can detect crop from weed. What we're doing here is we're taking pictures and we're classifying them as crop or weeds and drawing like little red circles around the weeds. In its final configuration, this is going to have 36 cameras on it, and those cameras are going to take real-time pictures pointed ahead of the crop, so it has a little bit of a look ahead, and it's going to go as fast as the machine goes today.
Once identified, only the weeds get sprayed.
You're going to only spray where the weeds are, and that's going to be, maybe up to a 50% herbicide reduction.
And the future, with even more accurate application.
The spray boom here, you can see these black solenoids. Each of these individual solenoids, there's 22 of them, and it can basically spray an area on the ground that's an inch by an inch.
With the potential to see a 90% reduction in herbicide use.
If you have to spray less herbicide but still get the same excellent weeding result, that's cost savings to the farmer.
But see it, spray it is just one piece of the puzzle. New pulsing spray nozzles are helping to minimize off-target drift from outside the cab to inside.
And we have an incredible amount of data that's coming off of not just the sprayer, but tractors, planters, combines that are in the field.
The increase in data is driving the need for faster connectivity, including 5G.
For us, 5G really unlocks the opportunity for faster machine-to-machine communication. If we had 2 combines running in the field at once, and we wanted to pass some optimized settings from one combine to the other, in today's environment, that often takes about 30 seconds, or we assume it's 30 seconds to get from machine A to machine B, as that data goes up to the cloud. And 5G unlocks the capability for that to happen in just a second.
Even while many parts of rural America struggle with adequate internet connectivity.
It's just shy of 25 million Americans don't have access to broadband connectivity, and of those 19 million, just over 19 million live in rural parts of the country. Microsoft conducted a usage data analysis that found that number is really likely much higher, and that as many as 168 million Americans don't actually access the internet at broadband speeds.
But not all high-tech tools come in big packages.
This is a leaf scanning technology and it was developed out of Purdue University.
And what it does, you are able to scan a leaf and determine the nutrient, water, and chemical composition of a plant.
The real-time readout has the potential to help farmers make immediate decisions.
We can go through a field and test hundreds of different sites, determine what the nutrient content is, and then delineate that over the field and come up with a prescription to the grower and send him an application file in less than an hour versus 3 to 5 days.
And the uses go beyond just standard row crops.
We're releasing this on a limited basis in corn and working on other applications such as hemp, because THC levels were exceeded in a lot of areas, and this is a technology that will allow us to do in-field testing and help mitigate those damages.
As farmers prepare for the future,
we are going to make the people's life easier and with more fun.
Where even the future of food, as agriculture knows it, is being reimagined.
We derive our soy protein that delivers that texture and chew in our product. We found that it was the most renewable source for that, so it helps us in our sustainability metrics, so that's why we moved to the choice of soy. 95% of the soy crops in the United States are GMO soy, and our secret ingredient or magic ingredient in heme, we use a genetically modified process in order to use fermentation to produce it at scale so that we can add to our product the same abundance of heme as you find in meat.
From fork to farm, how much of this new technology ultimately makes it from the trade show floor to America's farm rows and fields may be the biggest question left to answer. For U.S. Farm Report, I'm Clinton Griffiths.
Thanks, Clinton. And speaking of the future, later in the show, we'll continue our look at new technology, including some newly unveiled innovations on both the tractor and planter side of the business. All right, but first, could cattle prices continue to climb off demand? Our marketing roundtables from Illinois are next. Sam Hudson, Chip Nelliger rejoining me from Precision Planting's Winter Conference here in Tremont, Illinois this week. All right, Sam, before the break in our last roundtable, I asked Chip, okay, what are you telling producers right now when there's so much uncertainty? So before we move past China, what are you telling producers that are calling you right now?
I would mirror what Chip mentioned. I think we have to remind ourselves constantly that the fact that we signed this Phase 1 agreement doesn't absolve us of the potential of the South American crop, which has done nothing but continue to grow both in acres and yield over the last several years. We've seen China double their corn yield over the last 15 years. So we continue to find ourselves in this supply-led market. And when we're not at the front of the line from a demand standpoint, we've seen how that impacts us. This trade war with China is just a perfect example of that over the last 3.5 or 4 years. And there's all these questions about how much of that we're going to get back, whether we force them to or not. So I think the metrics of on the world scale, I think, has still got to be the focus. I know quality has been a big problem this year. So if you've got that on your mind, be aware of it, get it moved, especially if basis is good.
You mentioned quality. I'm hearing from producers in North Dakota that are basically just harvesting the corn to try to get it out, dumping it at the end of the field and waiting for the livestock folks to come in and take it because the quality's so poor. We know exports have struggled. I know USDA said domestic demand was a little bit better than what we thought and the usage has been good. But when you look at the quality, do you think the quality of our corn this year that was hurt by that early freeze or whatever it may be, do you think that hurts our export demand in 2020?
I don't think so in general. I think it was not just the Dakotas where the crop's still in the field, but overall it seemed like quality was off this year. Test weight was an issue. The commercials have a real knack for blending corn. That's where they've made a lot of their money in the last few years because the margins haven't been there for them like it has been in the past. I think we're not going to have much of an issue fulfilling exports. It hasn't been an issue yet on what we've exported out. And as part of this trade agreement too, that always was kind of the carrot that China could have out there was, we don't like the quality because maybe the price dropped and they could buy it cheaper. I think with some of the teeth that are in this trade agreement, trying to hold them to those numbers, that won't be as big an issue maybe as it has been in years past.
Yeah, does China care more about quality or price?
I think it's more about quantity and what they really even want. I don't think the quality will hinder us. I think that could be used as a scapegoat, but when you think about it, there's a lot of poor quality corn out there, but we grew a lot more acres of corn in the South this year than we had in the 2 or 3 years prior to that. So there's good quality inventories there if someone really wants it. And I think from a timing standpoint, it's just whether or not they come after it now. And if they don't want the corn, whether it's for the quality or what have you, what's holding them back from taking the products? The DDGs, the ethanol, I think we've got a lot more opportunity there potentially in the years ahead than the grain itself.
when you look at the talk of possibly 95 million acres of corn, if that happens, if USDA in their prospective plantings report comes out and says, yeah, we think there's going to be 95 million acres of corn, what happens to the corn market?
Well, I'm not sure. On paper, if they do that and use a trendline yield, you're looking at something like a 2.7 billion bushel carryout for corn. So it's one thing to have that on paper. It's another thing, we got to get it planted and we got to raise it. So I think that's the backdrop that's going to, maybe keep corn prices a little bit subdued here is if we plant that many acres, and I'm not sure we will yet, we're a long way from spring, but on paper, that's a big, big carryout, even assuming a little better demand. So it's it could be in a pretty bearish scenario pretty easily. I think, again, going back to before the break, you got to have a plan. And I think you'll see the rallies. You just better be willing to protect it.
Yeah, when you look at traders, in the back of their mind, is it that we had the wettest spring on record and still produce a 168 yield? I mean, is that a downfall for us even this year?
Yeah, I mean, how do you build a risk premium after 2019, I think is this question we got to ask ourselves too. And, do we mess up the crop? Sure, maybe we do, maybe we don't. After last year, it's tough to see how you do it unless you just don't get a rain at all. And this puts even more of that focus and emphasis on the demand side and how we come out of this.
What about cattle? Chip, I know hope that maybe China will take some of our beef. We could see some added demand there. Kind of wrap your mind around what's going on with cattle right now.
I think probably of any commodity, the meat side of the equation maybe has the most to gain from trade agreements, and not just China. We've redone this, the Japanese trade agreement. That's a massive benefit to cattle. The USMCA is going to be big from a Mexico standpoint, and I think China can be in there for obviously U.S. pork, but U.S. beef as well. So to me, the livestock markets, pork, beef, poultry, have maybe the most to gain out of this trade agreement with China and the other countries also.
Chip, Sam, thank you so much for joining us this weekend. We appreciate it. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report. Well, it's been a while since we've headed out west and checked in with Baxter Black, but with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association's annual meeting just a couple weeks away, we thought it was time to get a little dose of Baxter.
I can always count on my friends to add a new page to my scrapbook entitled, How to Mess Up a Simple Calving. This chapter would be entitled, Halter Safety. Rob was deep into calving his heifers. For his regular checks, he used a typical rancher's four-wheeler. It was dipping into twilight when Rob made his just before supper heifer check. He was looking for a brockle-faced mama that he'd noticed going into labor earlier. Well, he found her in a large depression on her back and gasping. Grabbing his handy cow halter, he put it over her head and gave a manly pull. No luck. Thinking quickly, he tied the halter shank to the end of a longer rope, which he then tied to the back of the four-wheeler. So far, so good. The rope came tight, but the four-wheeler lifted off its front wheels and came dangerously close to tipping over backwards. Next try, he locked his legs around the handlebars and leaned out over them like a figurehead on a schooner to distribute the load. And he gave it the gas. The rope broke. Rob fell forward head first as the spinning machine climbed over him, rolled him up, and laid him out flat. Not to be discouraged, the third time was the charm. Rob found a heavier piece of rope, rehitched, and voila! He dragged that heifer to flatter ground, bless his heart. He dismounted to untie the machine, unfortunately not noticing that the heifer had regained her feet and was coming his way. Yes, she hit him from behind, bounced him off the four-wheeler and walked him like a foot log, and then she turned to escape the scene of the crime and pulled the machine over the top of our hapless hero, dragging the whole wreck to a stop. In retrospect, Rob said she turned out to be a pretty good mother, but he was never able to drive his four-wheeler into any pasture where she was without being attacked. There is an epilogue. The heifer outlived the machine. This is Baxter Black from out there.
All right, up next, does the U.S. have a wild hog problem? That's customer support this week.
The feral hog problem is not getting better.
This segment is brought to you by the foundational partners of America's Conservation Ag Movement, a diverse public-private partnership empowering farmers and ranchers in their conservation agriculture journey for resilient businesses, healthier ecosystems, and stronger communities.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Wild or feral hogs, is it becoming a pandemic? Here's John Phipps.
We received this email from Jay Johnson. How about covering the wild pig pandemic that has been causing havoc on agriculture and our food resources? Mr. Johnson then goes on at some length about what he sees as a deliberate effort to suppress a solution to this serious invasive species problem. After serving on many farm organization and church committees, I've always been skeptical of such conspiracy-type stories which require implausible levels of cooperation and discipline, which I've never seen in any group. Consequently, I'll just append his entire email to the online version of this segment, and you can read it and judge for yourself. It involves a special poison dispensing device that, in theory, only feral hogs can access, so other animals, such as bears, would not be at risk. As best I can determine from my research, Texas is the only state allowing toxicants, poisons, as a control measure. It is also one of the states hardest hit by this plague of pigs, along with other Deep South states, and oddly, Wisconsin. Given my total unfamiliarity with this issue, I checked with our resident outdoors expert, Chip Flory, who has hunted feral hogs. He pointed out how hard they were to find and kill, and also why poison is a tricky method of control. Even if only hogs can get to the bait, their poison-tainted flesh could wind up harming scavengers or even hunters. In his words, imagine Fido finding a poisoned carcass and the uproar that could ensue. He also went through the math of how rapidly feral hogs can reproduce, which is staggering. One problem is the Texas-approved toxin warfarin can take several days to kill. It is a blood thinner, basically, and hogs are acutely sensitive to it. This means the affected hog could be miles away and endanger a wide area. Still, the core problem here is toxicants could be the only reasonably effective control method for this exploding population. While wildlife and nature organizations are correct about the risks, the lack of alternatives may force such actions. It also doesn't help that we have idiots, and I use this term purposefully, transporting feral hogs from the South to the Midwest to provide a cover for deer poaching. Farm Journal's Chris Bennett wrote a superb article on this senseless practice that I'll also link to online. Do we have a growing feral hog problem? Definitely, and it's likely spreading to a farm near you. Would poisons help control it? Absolutely, but at considerable risk to the environment. Is the government complicit in a conspiracy to prevent use of such methods? Almost certainly not, I think. What is happening is officials are constrained by existing laws and public opinion, which can often give the appearance of indifference.
And as John's mentioned, we'll make sure to post that full viewer email online along with a link to Chris Bennett's story, which is full of twists and turns. You can find all of that on agweb.com. All right, when we come back, is there such thing as a perfect planter? One company's giving it a shot. From the Farm is next.
Stories which require implausible levels of cooperation.
Well, several equipment manufacturers unveiled some cool technology and equipment this week, and it's really helping producers rethink or reimagine the way they plant. AGCO unveiling its first ever Fendt planter this week, one they say will change the way producers plant.
This was truly an exciting project.
With it being the first, the company started with a blank canvas, reimagining the modern planter.
We moved the toolbar back, but then there's also the problem that, somehow this has got to match the ground as it goes up and over. We're a long ways back from behind the bars, and so that's where that contouring toolbar came in. And really, that was just really the heartbeat that started this all out.
The Contour doesn't just move, it hugs the ground and shifts over hills and changing landscapes.
And what this does for us is allows us to sense on the rows where the parallel linkage is in respect to the row unit, and we're able to automatically adjust that to ensure that the row unit is at the optimal position to plant that seed.
From bringing the tires closer to the tractor to staggering the planter boxes, AGCO thinks this one planter could change the game of planting. Kinsey also coming out with new products this week, ones the company says are engineered to reduce downtime and repairs. Kinsey reconfigured its 4705 planter to also include tires in front of the toolbar, and it also boasts a 600-gallon liquid fertilizer capacity. It's every decision at planting that can be costly. During Precision Planting's winter conference this week in Illinois, Precision's lead agronomist Jason Webster said 2019 taught us a lot, and the biggest mistake, planting into tough conditions.
And when I did that at PTI, when I watched all my neighbors planting in those tough conditions, I was losing 57 to 67 bushel to the acre. Take that times the price of corn, and it was almost $250. You can put all the technology you want on a planter, but if you're planting into mud, you're going to start going backwards, and we did that this year.
Kubota unveiling a futuristic concept autonomous tractor called the X Factor, which is battery powered and has tracks. It was showcased at an event in Japan. Kubota saying the concept is a zero-emission vehicle using a combination of lithium-ion and solar batteries. From George Jetson-like tractors to planters that change the way farmers plant, equipment manufacturers are launching into 2020 on all cylinders.
Well, that's all the time we have this weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to join us next weekend. We'll take our show on the road from the Top Producer Summit in Chicago, Illinois. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.